He left 2 pregnant women behind and vanished. 3 years later, he saw one of them with both their children. Alexander Rivers was a man who thrived on control. Every aspect of his life had been meticulously planned, from the billion-dollar acquisitions to the perfect public image he had sculpted over the years. He never allowed chaos to touch him. Emotion, vulnerability, attachments, they were weaknesses he had learned to avoid. But control is a fragile illusion, and the day it shattered came without warning. He sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline, a view he had always found calming. The call came unexpectedly, cutting through the quiet hum of success. First it was Clara. Her voice was tense, trembling but determined. "We need to talk, Alex." Before he could process her words, another call beeped in. Layla. He hadn't heard her voice in weeks, but now she sounded breathless, urgent. "Alex, I'm pregnant." His world tilted, but not in the way movies dramatize such moments. It wasn't a dramatic crash, but a suffocating, creeping pressure that coiled around his chest. Both women. Pregnant. Both of them carrying his child. His carefully compartmentalized life had collided into a singular, inescapable reality. He didn't answer either of them right away. Instead, he stared out at the city, as if the answers might be hidden in the pattern of the lights. His mind did what it was trained to do: calculate risks, strategize exits. Stay and face the consequences, or leave before the walls closed in. The choice was clear, at least to the version of himself that had spent years perfecting the art of emotional detachment. By the end of the week, he was gone. He told himself it was temporary, a business expansion opportunity overseas that demanded his full attention. But deep down, he knew it was an escape. He flew to Tokyo, then London, then Dubai, burying himself in deals, surrounding himself with people who asked for nothing but his signature on contracts. He told himself that Clara and Layla would be fine. They were strong. They didn't need him. Or so he wanted to believe. Time blurred into months, months into a year. He never reached out. Not once. He didn't ask about appointments, about health, about the lives growing quietly while he crafted deals that would be front-page news. The guilt was always there, a persistent shadow, but he learned to function around it. He convinced himself that being absent was better than being a failure in their lives. But running doesn't erase the past. It simply delays its return. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 years after he had disappeared from their lives, Alex walked into the hospital for a routine business meeting with the medical board. The irony of his presence there was not lost on him, negotiating investments in family health initiatives, all while having abandoned his own. He moved through the lobby with the same air of untouchable confidence that had always shielded him, but fate has a cruel way of finding cracks in even the strongest armor. He saw her before she saw him. Clara sat on a bench near the large glass windows, her hair slightly longer but unmistakably her. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a light sweater, yet she radiated the quiet strength that had once terrified him. But it wasn't Clara alone who stopped him in his tracks. It was the children. 2 toddlers sat beside her. A little girl with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, his eyes, was tugging at Clara's sleeve, while a boy, with lighter brown hair but the same unmistakable gaze, sat calmly, stacking colored blocks in a careful tower. They looked nothing alike, and yet, there was something that connected them, something more than blood. They felt like a unit. A family. Alex's chest tightened. He couldn't move. Couldn't think. The weight of 3 years crashed into him in a single breath. Clara looked up. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. There was no shock in her expression. Only a calm, measured stare that said, "I knew you'd come back eventually, and I'm ready for you." Alex took a step forward, but every movement felt like wading through cement. He didn't know what to say. There were no rehearsed lines for this. No prepared statements for confronting the life you tried to abandon. "Alex," Clara said, her voice even, as if they had spoken just yesterday. "You're late." The little girl looked up at him, her blue eyes curious, tilting her head in a way that mirrored his own old habit. The boy followed, more cautious, but his gaze held an odd familiarity that Alex couldn't place at first. Then it hit him. Layla. He couldn't breathe. "These are your children," Clara said, standing slowly, placing a protective hand on each of them. "Emily and Liam." Liam. The name was a blow to his gut. Layla had always loved that name. Alex's lips parted, but the words didn't come. How do you ask about a woman you abandoned, about a child you didn't know existed until that very moment? How do you stand in front of a life you should have been part of and ask for anything? Forgiveness? A chance? Clara didn't give him time to drown in his guilt. "We should talk," she said, motioning toward a quieter hallway. "You owe them that much." And for once in his life, Alex Rivers, the man who had always set the terms, followed, knowing that this conversation wasn't one he could control. This time, the power wasn't his. It never had been. As he walked beside Clara, with two small shadows clinging to her hands, Alex felt the first crack in the facade he had spent his life perfecting. He knew, with absolute certainty, his life had just changed forever. The hallway felt endless as Alex followed Clara, each step heavier than the last. The walls were lined with photographs of smiling families, cheerful moments captured in sterile frames. They seemed to mock him as he walked, a man who had built an empire of glass towers but failed at the simplest human connection. His palms were sweating, though his face remained calm, the product of years of masking. But Clara was no longer someone he could hide from. She had seen him at his worst. And here she was, walking ahead with a straight back, two children at her side, children he had never met yet who shared his very blood. She led him into a small consultation room, away from the curious stares of the hospital staff. The room was quiet, save for the faint humming of a ventilation unit. She gestured for him to sit, but Alex remained standing, his body too tense, too restless to settle. "Start talking, Alex," Clara said, her tone sharp but not cruel. She wasn't angry. She was past anger. Her voice carried the weight of disappointment, which was infinitely worse. Alex's throat was dry, but he forced the words out. "I didn't know. About them. About any of it. I thought time would sort itself out." "Time doesn't raise children," Clara shot back, her blue eyes glinting. "It doesn't wipe away nights when they cry for hours. It doesn't fill in the gaps of questions I couldn't answer." He looked at the children, sitting quietly now, too young to understand the gravity of the conversation but sensitive enough to feel the tension in the air. Emily was playing with a small toy, glancing up at him every so often with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Liam, quieter, stayed close to Clara's leg, his tiny fingers clutching the fabric of her jeans. "I didn't know about Liam," Alex said, his voice softer now, cracking under the truth. "I didn't even know Layla was." He stopped himself, unable to finish the sentence. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "She didn't get the chance to tell you. Not properly." She took a breath, steadying herself. "She and we found out about each other after you left. It was a mess. But somehow, instead of tearing each other apart, we stuck together. We were both terrified, Alex. Both abandoned by the same man. But Layla, she was different. She still hoped you'd come back." Alex closed his eyes, the weight of his own cowardice suffocating him. "And she didn't make it." Clara's expression softened, just a fraction, as if his words chipped away at the wall she had built. "No. She didn't. Complications during labor. She fought hard, but her body gave up. Clara's eyes glossed over, but she didn't cry. Before she went into surgery, she made me promise. She said if anything happened, Liam wouldn't grow up alone. That I'd make sure of it. Alex felt his knees weaken, and he sat down abruptly, his hands trembling. I wasn't there. For her. For him. No, you weren't. Clara's tone didn't hold accusation. It was simply a fact. Cold. Irrefutable. I don't deserve to be his father, Alex murmured, not sure if he was speaking to Clara or himself. Clara let the silence hang in the room. It wasn't a forgiving silence. It was a space for him to feel the consequences. Deserving has nothing to do with it. You either show up now or you don't. I'm not going to beg you. Alex's gaze locked onto Liam, who was watching him intently now, his blue eyes reflecting a quiet innocence that shattered Alex's composure. He had spent his life being needed by thousands, investors, employees, media, but never in a way that truly mattered. No one had needed him the way these children did. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was capable of being what they needed. Clara, he said slowly, I don't know how to do this. I've never been shown how. Clara's posture relaxed slightly. She sat down across from him, their knees almost touching. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be present. The simplicity of her demand struck him harder than any of her earlier words. He could fix companies, flip fortunes, control narratives. But this wasn't about control. This was about showing up, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was terrifying. They've grown up thinking they're siblings, Clara continued, her voice softer now, less guarded. Emily knows you're her father. She asks about you. Liam, he doesn't know. But he deserves the truth. Alex's hands curled into fists on his lap. I want to know them. I want to know you. Not as some pathetic attempt at redemption, but because I can't walk away from this again. Clara nodded slowly. Then start by spending time with them. Not with gifts, not with grand gestures. Just time. It was a challenge Alex knew he had to accept, but also one that terrified him. He wasn't the man who baked cookies or read bedtime stories. But maybe, he thought, that was precisely why he needed to become that man. As the tension in the room eased, Emily walked over to him, her small hand hesitantly reaching for his. Alex looked down, his heart clenching at the simple, instinctive trust she offered. He took her hand, his large fingers curling gently around hers. Hi, she said, her voice a sweet, soft melody that seemed to cut through years of his own emotional armor. Hi, Emily, Alex whispered, his voice catching. Liam stayed close to Clara, shy but watching. It would take time. Trust wasn't something that appeared overnight. It was built, moment by fragile moment. Clara stood up, gathering her things. We're going to the park after this. You're welcome to come. It wasn't an invitation. It was a test. Alex stood too, adjusting his jacket, though for once in his life, he didn't care about his appearance. He cared about keeping pace with the small hands that now clung to Clara's, and maybe, one day, to his as well. As they left the consultation room, stepping into the bright afternoon sun, Alex felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It wasn't certainty. It was something messier, scarier. It was the start of learning how to stay. The park was a short walk from the hospital, but to Alex, it felt like crossing into an entirely foreign world. The cold steel and glass he was used to gave way to green grass, the sharp scent of flowers, and the gentle hum of children's laughter. He hadn't set foot in a place like this since his own childhood, a childhood that felt more like a chapter in someone else's life. Yet here he was, following Clara as she walked ahead, a diaper bag slung over her shoulder, Emily skipping beside her, and Liam gripping her free hand with quiet determination. Alex kept his distance at first, watching the three of them move as a unit. They didn't need him. They had learned to exist without him. But that wasn't the point now, was it? The point was to show up anyway, even when the door wasn't wide open. Especially then. Clara found a quiet bench shaded by a large oak tree. She settled there, pulling out snacks and juice boxes as if this were the most natural routine in the world. Emily and Liam sat down obediently, their little legs dangling above the ground, chattering to each other in a language only siblings, by blood or by choice, could understand. Alex stood awkwardly a few steps away, hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't know how to insert himself into this scene without feeling like an intruder. Business negotiations, hostile takeovers, courtroom dramas, those were his battlefield. But here, with two small children who barely knew him, he was lost. Clara noticed his hesitation. She didn't call him over, didn't offer him a way out. Instead, she said to Emily, just loud enough for him to hear, "Emily, why don't you ask Alex to join us?" Emily looked up at him, her blue eyes bright beneath her dark lashes. "Daddy, sit with us," she called, the word daddy sounding foreign and fragile, yet undeniable. It hit him like a blow to the chest. The word he didn't think he deserved. The title he had forfeited. But here it was, handed to him not with resentment, but with innocent expectation. He moved slowly, lowering himself onto the edge of the bench. Clara didn't say anything. Neither did Liam. The boy sat quietly, his gaze darting between his mother and this man who was supposed to be someone important in his life but had been a ghost until now. Alex cleared his throat, suddenly desperate to bridge the gap. "What are you guys eating?" It was a stupid question. The snacks were right in front of him. But Emily didn't mind. She beamed, holding up a small box of crackers as if she were presenting a prize. "Wanna share?" she offered. Alex smiled, genuinely, taking a cracker and popping it into his mouth. "Delicious," he said, exaggeratedly, making a face that pulled a giggle from Emily and, to his surprise, a shy smile from Liam. Clara watched him out of the corner of her eye, but she said nothing. She wasn't going to give him credit for small victories. She wanted consistency. And Alex was starting to understand that. As the afternoon unfolded, Alex found himself doing things that felt comically small yet monumentally difficult. He helped Emily tie her shoelace, even though his hands fumbled with the tiny knot. He pushed Liam gently on the swing, unsure of how high was too high, until Clara casually instructed, "Liam likes gentle pushes. Let him feel in control." He listened. And for once, Alex Rivers didn't try to control the moment. He followed their pace. The hours slipped by, and with every passing minute, the walls began to shift. Not crumble, but shift. Clara started addressing him directly, giving him simple instructions as if testing how far he was willing to be guided. The children started gravitating towards him, not constantly, but enough that he didn't feel like an outsider anymore. They didn't demand grand gestures. They didn't need perfect words. They needed him to be there, fully present, stumbling his way through moments most fathers learned years earlier. There was a moment, as the sun dipped lower, when Emily climbed into his lap, utterly unprompted. She leaned her head against his chest, her small hand curling into his shirt. It was so simple, so innocent, yet Alex felt a lump form in his throat, a feeling so foreign it almost scared him. He looked at Clara, who was watching quietly, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes were softer now. Liam, not to be left out, approached next, though cautiously, offering Alex a small pebble with the seriousness of a ceremonial offering. Alex accepted it with the gravity it deserved, nodding solemnly as if he had been entrusted with a great treasure. It was ridiculous, yet sacred in a way no business deal had ever been. When the breeze picked up and the children began to yawn, Clara gathered their things. She slung the bag over her shoulder and glanced at Alex, who had stood awkwardly, unsure if he should offer to carry something, unsure of what the next step was. "Walk us home," Clara said simply, and it was the closest thing to an invitation he had received from her. The walk back wasn't filled with deep conversations or dramatic confrontations. It was ordinary, which, to Alex, felt extraordinary. The children skipped ahead, pointing at shop windows, their giggles filling the space between Alex and Clara. He found himself stealing glances at her, noticing things he had once overlooked. The way she tilted her head when Emily said something funny. The way she instinctively reached out to steady Liam when he tripped over a loose paving stone. The way she never asked for help, but also didn't stop him when he offered his hand. When they reached their apartment building, Clara turned to him, the children already rushing inside. "You can come up. Help get them settled. If you want." It was not a demand. It was not a test. It was a choice. "I want to," Alex said, and he meant it. That evening, as he sat cross-legged on the living room floor, building block towers with Liam and Emily, Alex realized something. Redemption wasn't earned through apologies or grand gestures. It was earned in the small, repetitive acts of being present, of showing up even when you felt unworthy. Every block placed, every toy handed back, every smile drawn from hesitant faces was a brick in the foundation of a life he had once run from. As Clara watched him from the kitchen, her arms crossed but her expression thoughtful, Alex understood that this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about trust. And trust would not be given, it would be built, quietly, stubbornly, moment by moment. And for the first time in his life, Alex Rivers was ready to build something that couldn't be measured in profit margins. Something real. The next few weeks unfolded in a rhythm Alex had never experienced before. His days, once dictated by conference calls, investment briefings, and a schedule so meticulously crafted that not a second was wasted, were now measured in school drop-offs, playground visits, and chaotic family dinners where more food ended up on the floor than in mouths. It was humbling. It was exhausting. And it was the most alive he had felt in years. But beneath the growing warmth of these new routines, a storm brewed silently. There was a weight Clara carried that she hadn't yet unburdened. Alex could see it in the way her smile sometimes faltered when she thought no one was watching, in the way her gaze would drift away when Liam asked about things a father should have been there for. She was grateful for his efforts, but the wall between them remained intact. And Alex was beginning to understand why. One quiet evening, after the children had finally surrendered to sleep, Clara sat on the small couch in the living room, her posture rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Alex, seated across from her, recognized the look in her eyes. It wasn't anger anymore. It was the weight of unspoken truths. "You've been trying," Clara said, her voice low, almost fragile. "I see it. And the kids, they see it too." Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, bracing himself. "But it's not enough, is it?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line before she exhaled slowly. "It's not about enough, Alex. It's about truth." She stood and walked to a shelf, pulling down a small box. He recognized it immediately. It was Layla's. The design was familiar, something he had once bought her on a whim during a business trip to Paris, a small gesture of affection that, back then, had cost him nothing. Clara placed the box on the coffee table between them. "Layla wrote letters," she said, her voice tight. "To you. To Liam. To me. She knew you wouldn't read them then, but she wrote them anyway. Hope is a stubborn thing." Alex felt his breath catch as Clara opened the box, revealing a stack of envelopes, each labeled in Layla's soft handwriting. She pulled one out, sliding it towards him. The envelope was marked with his name. With trembling fingers, Alex opened it. The words were Layla's voice, echoing in his mind as if she were sitting across from him. She spoke of her fears, of her excitement, of her heartbreak over his absence, yet not once did she let bitterness seep into her words. She wrote of Liam, of the little life growing inside her, and her quiet, desperate hope that one day Alex would find the courage to be more than a name on a birth certificate. He couldn't finish the letter. His vision blurred, the words swimming as a lump formed in his throat. He placed the paper down carefully, as if mishandling it would somehow dishonor her memory. "I should have been there," Alex said, his voice barely audible. "I should have stayed. I should have, everything." Clara sat beside him, the proximity intimate but heavy. "Layla knew you were scared. She wasn't naive, Alex. But she also believed people could change." Her eyes, though still guarded, softened. "I watched her fight for you, even when you didn't know it." Alex swallowed the guilt that threatened to consume him. "I don't deserve to carry Liam's last name," he confessed. "I don't deserve any of this." Clara's gaze turned sharp. "This isn't about what you deserve. This is about what you choose now. Deserving has nothing to do with showing up." She paused, her next words deliberate. "Liam doesn't need a perfect father. He needs the one who's here. The one who's willing to stay when it's uncomfortable." Her words settled in his chest, heavy yet clarifying. He had spent his entire life calculating worth, measuring value, making every decision through the cold lens of return on investment. But life wasn't a balance sheet. Clara and these children weren't assets to acquire or liabilities to fix. They were people, broken and whole in ways that couldn't be solved with strategies. They needed him flawed, present, and willing to stand in the fire of his own mistakes. The days that followed were filled with small but significant shifts. Alex stopped looking at his phone every 10 minutes, disconnected from the world that had once ruled him. He focused on learning the details that truly mattered, the way Liam liked his sandwiches cut into triangles, how Emily insisted on 3 bedtime stories instead of 2, how Clara, despite her fierce independence, relaxed when he took charge of morning breakfasts, even if he was still terrible at making pancakes. But the hardest moment came one evening when Liam, who had always been more reserved around Alex, finally asked the question that had been lurking in the shadows. They were sitting on the floor, building an elaborate train track, when Liam looked up and, with the innocent bluntness only a child could possess, asked, "Why weren't you here when I was born?" The question pierced deeper than any boardroom interrogation ever had. Alex felt Clara freeze across the room, her back turned as she pretended to busy herself with folding laundry, giving him space to answer. Alex put down the toy in his hand, meeting Liam's gaze directly. "Because I was very, very scared," he said honestly. "I thought if I stayed, I'd make everything worse. But that was a mistake. A really big one. And I'm so sorry, buddy." Liam seemed to consider this answer with the gravity of a seasoned judge. Then, after a long pause, he simply nodded and continued building his track, as if to say, "That's enough for now." That night, after the kids were asleep, Clara found Alex sitting on the couch, staring out the window into the dark. She sat beside him, their silence no longer strained but companionable. "You did well," she said softly. "With Liam." Alex shook his head, though a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I think he's going easy on me." Clara chuckled quietly. "He's testing you. We all are." He turned to her then, his expression more vulnerable than it had ever been. "I don't want this to be temporary, Clara. I'm here. For good. If you'll let me." Her response wasn't immediate. Instead, she reached out, taking his hand, lacing their fingers together. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement. He was here, and for tonight, that was enough. As they sat there in the quiet, their fingers intertwined, the weight of years slowly started to lift. There were still battles ahead, wounds that wouldn't heal overnight. But they had started something neither of them had expected, a life not built on grand plans or perfect circumstances, but on choosing each other, every day, in the small, imperfect moments. For Alex Rivers, that was a foundation stronger than any empire he had ever built. The air inside Clara's small apartment grew warmer with each passing day, not because of the changing season but because of the fragile, undeniable shift in the atmosphere. It was no longer just her space. Alex was becoming part of it, not through grand declarations, but through the quiet routine of simply being there. He had no formal claim to this life, but he was beginning to carve out a place in it with every breakfast made, every story read, every tantrum soothed with awkward yet earnest attempts at fatherly comfort. But as much as things seemed to settle, Alex knew the hardest battles were yet to come. His past hadn't magically disappeared, and the world outside Clara's apartment walls was still waiting, watching, ready to judge. He had distanced himself from his corporate empire, but that empire wasn't done with him. The whispers had already started, investors questioning his absence, board members plotting their next moves. His name was still a brand, and his sudden disappearance from the spotlight made people uneasy. One evening, after Clara had tucked the children into bed and the apartment had settled into its familiar quiet hum, Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. Messages piled up, some from his assistant, others from board members who were less patient, demanding explanations. He had ignored them for weeks, but now, the pressure was mounting. Clara noticed his tense posture as she entered the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. "They won't stop, will they?" she asked, her voice calm but knowing. Alex shook his head, not bothering to sugarcoat the truth. "No. They're vultures. They sense when the king is off the throne." Clara sat across from him, her gaze steady. "So, what's your plan?" "Because you can't live in hiding forever, Alex. Not from them. Not from yourself." He appreciated her directness. Clara had always been the one person who refused to handle him with caution, which was exactly what he needed. "I'm not hiding," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "But I'm done playing by their rules. I don't want to go back to the way things were." "Then change the game," Clara said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Alex looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound easy." "I didn't say it would be easy," she corrected. "But you've built empires, Alex. Surely, you can build something that actually matters." That night, as Clara slept, Alex stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, piecing together an idea that had been slowly forming in the back of his mind. The business world had always measured worth in profits, in power. But what if he built something that wasn't about numbers? What if his legacy wasn't another skyscraper with his name on it, but a sanctuary for families like Clara's and Layla's? For children like Liam and Emily who deserved more than being pawns in someone else's empire? He didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, he had a plan. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex immersed himself in research, drafting proposals, reaching out to former colleagues who hadn't yet sold their souls to corporate politics. He envisioned a network of family support centers, places that provided not just medical care but emotional and financial support to single parents, to families who had been left behind by systems designed for profit, not people. This wouldn't be a charity project for PR. It would be his redemption. Clara watched him work, a cautious hope glimmering in her eyes. She had heard promises before. But this wasn't a promise. This was action. Real, tangible steps that went beyond apologies. Alex didn't ask for her approval. He simply involved her, asking her opinion on designs, on services that would actually help people like her. And slowly, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the same man who had once run away. But the outside world wasn't going to make this easy. When news of Alex's new project leaked, the media frenzy was instant. Headlines ranged from "Disgraced CEO's Attempt at Redemption" to "Billionaire's Latest Vanity Project." Clara feared that the negative press would drive him back into his shell, but Alex surprised her. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. One evening, after another relentless news cycle, Clara found Alex sitting on the apartment balcony, staring at the city skyline. She joined him, their shoulders brushing as they sat in the comfortable quiet that had become their sanctuary. "They're going to keep twisting the story," she said softly. "I know," Alex replied, his voice calm, resolute. "But this isn't for them. This is for Liam. For Emily. For Layla." Clara turned to him, seeing not the man who had once been ruled by ego and fear, but the man who was finally learning to live with both, without letting them define him. "You're changing," she whispered. Alex looked at her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen. "Because for the first time, I have something worth changing for." The following week, Alex held a press conference, not in a lavish hotel ballroom, but in a modest community center. He spoke not as a CEO, but as a father, as a man who had failed but was choosing to do better. His speech wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, imperfect, but real. And though the media still sought scandal, there was something undeniable in his presence, in the way he owned his failures without deflecting them. Clara watched from the sidelines, Emily on her hip and Liam clutching her hand. She realized then that redemption doesn't come with applause or headlines. It comes in quiet victories, in the willingness to stay when things get uncomfortable, in the choice to build something good out of the rubble you created. That night, back at home, as the children slept, Alex approached Clara with a look of quiet determination. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Clara," he said. "I'm asking for the chance to build a life where you don't have to forgive me, because I won't give you reasons to." For the first time since his return, Clara didn't hesitate. She reached out, taking his hand, intertwining their fingers. It wasn't an answer, not yet. But it was a beginning. Alex had spent his life constructing empires built on power. Now, he was learning to build something far more fragile, far more valuable, a family. And he was willing to fight for it, no matter how long it took. The night before the opening of the first family center was unusually quiet. The apartment that had been alive with the sounds of toddlers squealing and blocks tumbling was now wrapped in a fragile stillness. The children were asleep, tucked into their shared room, their breaths a soft rhythm in the dim glow of the hallway light. Clara sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, watching Alex pace the living room with a tension she hadn't seen in weeks. He wasn't nervous about the launch itself, he was nervous about what it represented. This was no longer a project to salvage his reputation. It was personal now. It was about proving to himself, and to Clara, that he could be the man who stayed. Alex stopped pacing and turned to Clara, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "What if this isn't enough?" he asked, his voice breaking the quiet. "What if it's still not enough for them, for you?" Clara didn't answer immediately. She had learned that Alex wasn't always looking for answers when he spiraled like this. Sometimes, he just needed to let the words out, to give them air before they suffocated him. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she knew he needed to hear the truth spoken aloud. She stood up, crossing the room, and placed her hand gently on his chest, right where his heart was racing beneath his shirt. "Enough isn't a destination, Alex," she said softly. "It's a choice you make every day. You're not going to fix the past with one building, no matter how many families it helps. But you're here. You're still here. That's what matters to me." Her words sank into him, grounding him in a way no speech, no accolade ever had. Alex had spent his entire life chasing absolutes, success, power, recognition, but Clara had taught him that life wasn't made of absolutes. It was stitched together from imperfect, everyday choices. The next morning, the city seemed different. Not in any visible way, but in the way the air felt. Lighter, perhaps. Or maybe Alex was simply breathing differently now. The center was modest, nothing compared to the gleaming corporate towers he was used to unveiling. But it was warm. Real. Walls painted in soft colors, open spaces designed not for aesthetics but for comfort. There were no marble floors, no ostentatious logos. Just a welcoming place for people who needed to feel seen. Clara arrived with Emily and Liam just as the first families began to filter in. The children rushed ahead, their excitement contagious, while Clara lingered at the entrance, watching Alex as he moved through the crowd. He wasn't performing. He wasn't posturing. He was listening. Truly listening. To parents overwhelmed by systems that had failed them, to children who clung shyly to their mothers' skirts. This was where Alex belonged, not in a boardroom, but here, amidst the imperfect, beautiful chaos of real life. At the small, informal opening ceremony, Alex stood before a crowd that was unlike any audience he had faced before. These weren't shareholders or media moguls. These were families who had no idea who he used to be. They only knew the man who had built this place for them. His speech wasn't long. He didn't need it to be. He spoke of failure, of fear, of the countless ways he had gotten it wrong. But he also spoke of second chances, of the relentless power of choosing to show up. His voice wavered at times, but he didn't hide from it. Clara stood at the back, Liam's small hand in hers, watching as Alex dismantled his own facade in front of everyone. There was no applause when he finished, just a quiet, collective understanding that this man wasn't here to be praised. He was here to serve. Later that afternoon, as the event wound down and families settled into the new space, Alex found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children who were more interested in building block towers than in who he was. Emily plopped into his lap, chattering excitedly about how she wanted to be the boss of the playroom, and Liam, never one to be left out, joined in with his own ideas about painting the walls with dinosaurs. Alex listened to every word, fully present, completely grounded. Clara watched them, her heart tight in her chest, not with fear this time, but with an overwhelming sense of something she hadn't let herself feel fully until now: trust. Alex wasn't perfect. He never would be. But he wasn't trying to be perfect anymore. He was trying to be present. And that was a man she could build a future with. As the day drew to a close, and the last families left with smiles and promises to return, Alex and Clara sat on the front steps of the center, the evening sun casting a soft glow over the building that now bore no trace of his former life's arrogance. Emily and Liam played nearby, their laughter carrying through the quiet street. "You did it," Clara said, nudging Alex with her shoulder. "We did it," Alex corrected, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining naturally now. Clara looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the man who had vanished 3 years ago, but the one who had fought his way back, not with words, but with actions. She didn't tell him she forgave him. She didn't need to. Some things are understood in the silence between two people who've walked through fire and come out standing side by side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex turned to Clara, his voice low, serious but laced with a new kind of hope. "I don't want to just be a visitor in your life, Clara. I want to build it with you. All of it." Her answer wasn't immediate. She let the words hang, let him feel the weight of them. And then, with a quiet smile, she simply said, "Then stay." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And for Alex Rivers, a man who had once measured life in deals and contracts, that was the only promise that mattered now. He wasn't running anymore. He was staying. And this time, he knew what that truly meant. The days after the center's opening settled into a rhythm that felt foreign yet profoundly right to Alex. He had spent his life in a constant sprint, always reaching for the next win, the next impossible goal, but now, his days were filled with moments so small they would have seemed insignificant to his old self: making breakfast with Liam perched on the counter beside him, helping Emily untangle the strings of her toy kite, staying up late with Clara on the couch as they folded laundry in companionable silence. The grandeur of his past life had shrunk to fit into the ordinary, but he didn't miss it. In fact, he felt like he had finally arrived somewhere worth staying. But it wasn't all seamless. Clara was still guarded, though she let him in more now, giving him pieces of her trust but never the entire thing at once. Alex didn't mind. He knew he didn't deserve an easy road back. And then there were the children. Emily had grown quickly attached, her innocent heart eager to claim him as "daddy" in every sense. Liam, however, was different. He was quieter, watching Alex with eyes that seemed older than his years, testing his every word and action. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled lazily in the distance, Alex sat on the living room floor building a puzzle with Emily while Liam sat at the window, his small hand pressed against the glass, watching the raindrops race down. Clara was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared tea, and the scene felt almost too peaceful, too fragile. Liam's voice broke the calm. "Mommy says you left when I was in her belly." His tone was flat, casual, as if stating a simple fact, but Alex felt his stomach tighten. Clara froze in the kitchen, her hands pausing mid-movement. She didn't interfere, though. This was Alex's moment to answer. Alex set the puzzle piece down slowly, his gaze shifting to Liam. He didn't approach him, didn't try to bridge the physical space, but his voice was clear, steady. "She's right. I was scared. I didn't know how to be a good dad, so I ran away instead of trying." Liam turned his head slightly, his face unreadable. "Why?" Alex swallowed hard. "Because sometimes grown-ups are stupid. I thought I had to be perfect before I could be a good dad. But that's not true. I just needed to be here. With you. And I should have been." Liam seemed to mull over this, his little brow furrowing. After a moment, he asked, "Are you scared now?" Alex smiled, though his chest ached. "Every day. But I'm here anyway." That answer seemed to satisfy Liam. He slid off the windowsill and crossed the room, sitting beside Alex without saying a word. He didn't lean into him, didn't reach out, but his presence was a quiet acceptance. For now, that was enough. That night, after the children had drifted off to sleep, Clara joined Alex on the balcony. The city lights glimmered beneath a sky still streaked with fading storm clouds. She brought him a cup of tea, handing it to him without comment, and sat beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. "You handled that well," she said, her voice soft, a rare note of admiration threading through it. Alex chuckled, sipping his tea. "I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just making it up as I go." Clara smiled faintly. "That's parenting." He looked at her, studying the curve of her profile against the night sky, the way her hair tumbled loosely around her face. She was the strongest person he knew, and yet, there was a vulnerability in her tonight, as if the storms outside had cracked open something tender inside her too. "I want to ask you something," Alex said, setting his cup down, his tone serious now. Clara turned to him, her expression guarded but open. "Go on." "I know I can't erase the past. I know I can't change the way I left you and Layla to face everything alone. But I want to build a life with you, Clara. Not as a guest. As your partner. As their father. I want this to be our family. Not fractured. Whole. If you'll let me." Clara didn't answer immediately. She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the city below, to the tiny moving lights that once seemed so important in Alex's world. She had imagined this moment before, in her loneliest nights, but now that it was here, it didn't feel grand or overwhelming. It felt simple. Honest. "You're asking for something that takes time, Alex," she said quietly. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect. I still have days when I'm angry, when I remember how it felt to be left." "I don't need perfect," Alex said firmly. "I just need real. I can live with the hard days, as long as I'm facing them with you." Clara turned to him, her eyes shining, not with tears, but with something deeper. "Then stay. Not just here. Stay in the hard moments too. Don't run when it gets messy." "I won't," Alex promised, and for the first time in his life, he knew he would keep that promise. They sat in silence after that, their hands eventually finding each other's, their fingers lacing together naturally, like it was something they had always done. It wasn't an engagement. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. But it was the beginning of something they were both willing to fight for. In the following days, the shift in their home was subtle but unmistakable. Alex wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was there when Liam had nightmares, holding him until he calmed. He was there when Clara was too exhausted to cook, ordering takeout and fumbling through feeding the children. He was there in the mornings, rushing through chaotic school drop-offs, and at night, when the house was quiet, sitting with Clara on the couch, planning their next steps together, not in business, but in life. One evening, Emily pulled Alex aside with the seriousness only a child could muster. "Are you gonna be here for my birthday?" she asked, her blue eyes wide with hope. Alex crouched to her level, placing his hands gently on her small shoulders. "I'm going to be here for every birthday. Every school play. Every silly little thing you think doesn't matter, but does." Emily smiled, threw her arms around his neck, and in that moment, Alex Rivers realized that building empires had never brought him this kind of fulfillment. This, being a father, being Clara's partner, was the hardest, messiest, most rewarding endeavor of his life. He wasn't chasing redemption anymore. He was living it, every single day. The day of Emily's birthday dawned with a kind of quiet Alex wasn't used to. Not the heavy silence of a boardroom before a deal, nor the tense calm before a corporate battle. This was different. This was the soft hum of life unfolding slowly, the kind of morning where you wake up knowing something important was about to happen, not because it was grand or dramatic, but because it was real. The apartment was already alive with movement when Alex stepped out of the bedroom. Balloons floated lazily along the ceiling, streamers crisscrossed the living room in a charmingly uneven mess, and the kitchen counter was lined with bowls of snacks, some store-bought, some made from recipes Clara insisted weren't fancy but tasted like home. Emily had been up since dawn, bouncing with excitement, her curly hair a wild halo around her face as she darted from room to room, giving Alex hurried updates on the day's party mission. Liam, as always, was quieter, more reserved, yet even he had an energy about him, watching his sister's chaos with a half-smile as if amused by her endless enthusiasm. Alex, now fully immersed in the life he had once run from, found himself caught in the whirlwind of last-minute tasks Clara tossed his way, blowing up more balloons, moving furniture, checking if the cake was ready. It was simple. It was chaotic. It was perfect. But beneath the joy of the day, there was an undercurrent of something heavier. Alex had been planning something he hadn't told Clara yet. He had gone back and forth with himself about it, wondering if it was too soon, if he had earned the right. But as he watched Emily wrap her arms around Clara's waist, laughing at something only the two of them understood, Alex knew that this family wasn't something he wanted to just be part of. He wanted to build it fully, officially, and with intention. As guests began to arrive, neighbors, Clara's friends, and a few families from the center, Alex found himself in a strange position. He was no longer the man people whispered about in polished suits and expensive watches. He was Emily's dad, Liam's dad, Clara's person. People didn't approach him with cautious reverence anymore. They approached him with warmth, with shared stories of parenthood, with laughter that had no agenda. He felt like he belonged, not because of who he had been, but because of who he was trying to be now. When it came time to cut the cake, Emily insisted that both Clara and Alex stand beside her, each holding one of her hands. It was such a small gesture, but as the three of them leaned in to blow out the candles, Alex felt it. This was his family. His heart. His home. Later, after the guests had left and the apartment was a disaster of gift wrap, cupcake crumbs, and the soft hum of exhaustion, Alex found Clara on the balcony. She stood barefoot, a cup of tea cradled in her hands, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. He joined her quietly, his heart pounding with anticipation, but his hands steady. "You're quiet," Clara said, not turning, but he could hear the smile in her voice. "I've been thinking," Alex began, stepping beside her. "About how life used to be all about building empires, making headlines, being the man people feared or envied." He paused, taking the cup gently from her hands and setting it on the nearby table. "But none of that ever felt real. Not like this. Not like us." Clara looked at him now, her expression soft but curious. She knew him well enough to sense when he was building up to something. "I've spent so long trying to fix what I broke," Alex continued. "But today, watching you with Emily and Liam, watching us as a family, I realized I don't want to fix the past anymore. I want to build a future. With you. With them." He reached into his pocket, not with the smooth confidence of a billionaire accustomed to orchestrating perfect moments, but with the nervous energy of a man who had learned the value of imperfection. He pulled out a simple ring, nothing ostentatious, nothing that would make headlines. It was modest, elegant, something that felt like Clara. "I'm not asking for perfect," Alex said, his voice raw. "I'm not even asking for forgiveness. I'm asking if you'll build a life with me, not the life I ran from, but the one we've created now, in all its chaos and beauty." Clara was silent for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking between them. She didn't look at the ring. She looked at him, the man who had once broken her heart, who had returned not with promises, but with presence. The man who had stayed. "Yes," she said simply, but in that one word was everything. It wasn't the yes of a fairy tale proposal. It was the yes of a woman who had fought through betrayal, loss, and found something worth risking again. They stood on the balcony, their foreheads resting together, the city pulsing around them, but in that moment, it could have been just them and the stars. There was no dramatic kiss, no orchestrated celebration. There was just quiet certainty. Inside, Emily and Liam called for them, their laughter floating through the open door. Clara smiled, pulling back gently. "Looks like we're being summoned." Alex grinned, sliding the ring onto her finger with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. "Then let's go. We've got a family to raise." They walked back inside, hand in hand, stepping over toys and wrapping paper, into the beautiful, messy life they had chosen. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for Alex Rivers, that was everything. He had built companies, empires, entire legacies from the ground up. But none of them compared to what he was building now, a home, a family, a life where staying wasn't an obligation, but a choice he would make every single day.